crap. Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask, just what is in my storage locker? And literally, the moment I began talking, he began playing with his little rattly ball behind me. And, you know, I don't want to discourage him doing that. Anytime he plays with his little rattly ball, I let him just go at it to his heart's content. But, you know, it doesn't always just do the trick for him. And we'll see. We'll see how disruptive he feels like being. He's been taking the cold very hard. We've certainly been getting hit by the cold, nowhere near as bad as parts of the rest of the country. But it's been colder than he's accustomed to, and he's been spending a lot of time under the blanket, and it's all very adorable. Except when I have to get up. All right. So, I want to read a Catwoman comic book. So let's read Catwoman's 1995 annual. Kind of funny because I just wrote a very long essay on Batman year one, so let's give Catwoman year one a shot. Now, this was not a spontaneously generated year one story. This was part of an annual event. Yes, this was one of the annual events they did one of the years after Bloodlines. They weren't doing the crossovers anymore. They were doing the themes. And the theme this year was year one. All the characters with annuals got a year one story. And a few of them were actually decent. They got John Paul Leon to do a Superman annual, which I read on the TikTok channel a long time ago, relatively speaking. One of the most gorgeous Superman books you've ever seen. So, you know, they were, like any set of annuals, they're as good as the individual creators. Sometimes you luck out and you get, like, you know, a double-sized comic book written by, like, Trevor Von Eaton, and sometimes you get something that was drawn by someone who did not draw very many comic books. It's, you know, luck of the draw. So, who drew this? Jim Balent drew this. Jim Balent was the penciler, like the Catwoman guy in the 90s. Jim Balent was the first man who ever had a chance, shall we say, to make Catwoman popular as a monthly character, and he hit it out of the park. Think about the fact that Catwoman never had a monthly series, ever. She had a couple of like one-shots in the late 80s, but she was not a headliner. I mean, she was banned by the Comics Code for a good part of her career. But they never thought to give her her own series. And the moment they did, perennial seller. She's just always had a book since the first month they tried. She still has a book. No one has a book anymore. Catwoman still has a book. Ah, come on, you're going to knock it over. Yeah. Oh. Yes, folks. I'll keep that in so you can hear what I have to deal with. Usually I edit the worst stuff out, but I'll leave that in to shame him. I'm shaming you. I'm shaming you. I'm trying to tell the people about Jim Balent. And how, yes, I know it's not maybe the most well-regarded artistic run, and yet I assure you it was massively, massively popular. Popular enough that the reason they got Darwin Cook and a number of other really great creators to come in at the turn of the century and completely redo the character from stem to stern is because they had to do something as different as possible to stand out from what was a very popular, very prolific version of the character. She had her own book. She had plenty of special projects. You know, DC just suddenly realized in 1993, oh yeah, Catwoman, she can be a franchise player. People will buy the Catwoman comic books if we put them out. And we didn't think to do this until 1993. And you know, what can I say? I grew up with Jim Balent. I bought comic books because Jim Balent drew them. I'm not ashamed to say it. I liked his artwork. I'll still flip through an issue of Tarot when it crosses my path. He's an interesting creator. The fact that he made such a long and dogged career out of self-publishing, never really had a long run on any other character. He didn't come back to do a Wonder Woman or anything like that, because his style was very associated with a certain moment. Oh, he's still around. He did a Catwoman piece for their 90s cover theme. That was one of the most gorgeous pieces, Catwoman pieces, of her in the purple costume. And now we get to see him drawing something very close to Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Catwoman. I've just spent a lot of time thinking about Year One, the comic book, the Batman comic book, so I'm kind of excited about reading Catwoman Year One. Jordan B. Gorfinkel, wasn't he an editor? Jim Balent, breakdowns. James Hodgkins, finishes. Partially based on work by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. Well, at least they're telling us up front what we're getting here. And straight up, I would not have guessed before I plucked this comic out of my own boxes that I just did not remember owning, or at least reading this comic book. And yet, I would not have guessed that there is a Year One direct sequel, one of a handful of stories that purport to be direct sequels to Year One. One of them is drawn by Jim Balent. And indeed, this is, I guess, about what this character... Oh my goodness. Look at this. Look at this. Jim Balent, what have you been hiding? My God. You can almost take that for Paul Gulacy. My goodness. That is a nice looking comic book. He's trying. He read Year One and he's trying. My goodness. And with all these, man, it does. Actually, at least this spread, like, this is a nice looking spread. My goodness. I mean, this looks kind of rough, because what's happening here? She tried to rob someone and she got shot. So now she's falling in the water, and stuff about her past, maybe that's all we'll get about it. She never really had that distinctive a past. That was kind of the point of the character. She was sort of a nobody who made herself everything she had. I like Catwoman. I'm a Catwoman fan, I guess you could say. And so this is just, periods in her life when she's been abused. And, see, this is dealing with everyone's least favorite part of Year One, which is all this stuff with Selena Kyle as a sex worker, which is still controversial to this day. Can I even say that? Am I going to get demonetized? Is that how that works? It's not everyone, and it's part of the story that a lot of people have gone out of their way to avoid talking about, and yet this is dealing with it because they have to deal with why she's in this position for when, oh my, and this is the street. This is the street with the first big set piece when Bruce Wayne is in civilian clothes, and so he goes downtown, dressed as just like a dude. And he gets into an altercation, and he basically, he almost gets killed. And that's when he crawls back to the mansion. He's like, Father, I will become a bat. And she sees that because she sees all of Batman's. It's fresh in my head. Over the course of the story, Catwoman sees all of Bruce's major confrontations. She doesn't necessarily realize it. Although maybe that's what this is. I wouldn't be surprised if that came up in this book. Oh, man, now I want Spree. I don't want... It's not an appetizing ad, but really, no, I don't want to take candy from that man. This is a nice-looking comic book for, the comic about Jim Balent. Jim Balent doing his best, David Mazzucchelli, dealing with the more unwholesome aspects of Year One, which is just Selena Kyle having a lot of a lot of sexual relations. And going out as a cat burglar, stealing from dudes. And wow, that's interesting because this is so similar. You know, this is kind of like where she would end up in the early 2000s with just this very sleek, you know, a literal cat suit, cat burglar suit. Oh, wow. Hologram Jim Carrey Riddler. Can't beat it. Cannot beat it. Oh, and this is fun. This is corny, in a good way. There's a statue of Bast. Oh, and suddenly she's fighting ninjas. Well, we have deviated slightly from year one. Not necessarily, you know, it's very Miller touch, although ninjas were not in year one. Ninjas dominated, you know, Daredevil and certainly Ronin. Oh, and that's nice. See, that's the thing with Jim Balent. He knew how to tell a story. This reads extraordinarily well. This is a nice action sequence. She is getting her butt handed to her, and we see every blow. And of course, you know, she doesn't know what she's doing. But she knows how to spit in that guy's face. So she doesn't get killed, I guess, but she loses what she was trying to steal. Thinks I'm too scared to fall over. I'm not worth hiding from. Oh, so that guy's going to pay. You know, even after I think the tone is evened out a bit, that they've deviated from stuff that was in the Mazzucchelli artwork. You know, the tone is evened out a bit, but it still looks really nice. Who finished this? I didn't recognize that name at all. James Hodgkins. This is a nicely inked comic book, I have to admit. You know, it's layouts, because Balent was doing the monthly at this time. So, you know, him only being able to do layouts for the annual, I mean, still doing layouts for the annual while doing the monthly book, that is impressive. Selling the Batman the Animated Series VHS. Ninjas. So she's got to learn ninja secrets somehow, I guess. And here's an ad for more of the annuals. Don't recognize. Is that? Yeah, no, that's not really Brent, is that Brent Anderson? It's like the one name that I can look on there and think might be interesting. Or at least that I know. So, you know, she's just doing ninja stuff, learning. She wants knowledge. She wants to learn. Okay. So she has to have a martial arts background for her to be able to do what she does, which isn't necessarily something that was always present in the character. And yet this is kind of definitely in the, you know, Miller Claremont wheelhouse here. Ninja training. Although this is the mid-90s, so, you know. Bit of a throwback. But, you know, the fact that they went back to ninjas just, you know, betrays the debt this character, well, all the characters, all the Batman characters owe to, you know, Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's interpretation. You know, it's the basis even of the Balent Catwoman. You know, this is her. And then she grows into, you know, that. Okay, here's some rather stereotyped Asian martial arts masters. We're going to pass right over that. Oh, Blockbuster. No, I'm not going to accept any of the Blockbuster nostalgia. We're not going to do it here. Blockbuster was garbage. They had terrible selection. When they started, when them and other, you know, chains of similar stature started to take over from the mom and pop video stores, or even the supermarket video stores. Supermarkets had video stores for decades, well, at least a decade, 2 decades, they were pretty solid in grocery stores, and then they just faded away, and you don't see that anymore. But sometimes you find really interesting stuff because, however those grocery stores put together, videotape libraries, you'd find just like really eclectic, videotapes just in the middle of nowhere. And you never got that with Blockbuster, and your movies were edited. And, we went to Blockbuster when we had to because that was just the way of it. You just rented a bunch of, new movies. It wasn't that big of a deal. But you'd never liked giving them your money. Okay, don't get me started. There's no nostalgia over that company. Although, look at this is still even nice. Even just this martial arts, jazz. These small panels. Clear storytelling. That's one thing you can't say. Jim Balent knows how to draw a comic book. And here's the day where the police blow up a building to kill Batman, and it still doesn't do the trick. And he does this, I guess it's something that he could really only do once, where it's kind of the goofiest, thing in the story in terms of like Batman super science, because it's just like he has a magic button that he can press to bring all the bats, and not to attack people or anything, just have a cloud of bats in his vicinity for him to escape. And I guess that's probably not something that he can do all that often. But it's a really effective set piece, and the third issue of that. It feels in a lot of ways like the climax because it's almost like that's when he convinces the city that he's kind of a force of nature. But the real climax of the book is, I think, the scene at the very end where he saves Gordon's baby on the bridge. And there's the scene with the cat. Mazzucchelli's, staging. So yeah, this is Jim Balent going to school on David Mazzucchelli for a whole issue. Remarkable. And I've never heard anyone mention this comic existing. And it's so interesting. Because this is her leaving, deciding she doesn't want to live this life anymore. She's seen something better, so suddenly she wants a costume, a real costume. And there we go. That is a nice looking Jim Balent and James Hodgkins doing their level best, David Mazzucchelli. That's interesting. Go tell all your friends about that. That is interesting. So she's just stealing stuff now, like a more effective tuxedo moon. And she's beating up these rent-a-cops. One of them tries to punch her in the breadbasket, and he almost breaks his hand on her rock-solid abs. Because she has ninja training. And everyone starts realizing, because they get these police reports of this absolutely phenomenal, Catwoman with, cat burglar with ninja skills. Oh, here's Harvey Bullock. Something or other. I don't know. I'm not reading this right now. There's Selena Kyle. She's starting to tease her hair up, like the Balent. Oh, and then we got this is totally a Balent design. This is just, it's so busy. So there's something sharp. He's got an animal theme. And it's drawn sort of like Frank. I want to say this almost seems like, he's trying to draw like later Miller here. Very interesting. I mean, look at the Venetian blinds, kind of a dead giveaway. Oh, and a tile floor. Man, I associate tile floors with Electra Lives Again. There are a lot of them in that. This comic was put together with a lot of love towards Frank Miller, I gotta say. Surprisingly, I didn't know what to expect when I pulled this out of the pile. I didn't remember reading this at all, and it's a pretty decent comic book. And it just, these dudes, or this dude fighting her. Nice action. It reads so well. He almost gets her with a knife, and then she scratches him on the face. She escapes through a broken window, breaks the window to escape. And there's those ninjas again. My sensei, I will always remember, and I don't know if this stuff has ever been mentioned again. Wonder what Batman's up to tonight. Only the beginning. You know, if a story ends with only the beginning. Oh, and there you go. Although she wasn't in... Man, I can't help liking this movie a lot. I think Batman and Robin is a genuinely good and misunderstood film. I really do. And you may think I'm a crazy person. You may want to complain to YouTube about this channel, hearing me say that. But I think it's a misunderstood masterpiece. It's an interesting film. It's a well-made film. But it's just a weird film that was really popular. And she is so gorgeous in it. She's so gorgeous. If you're going to see this movie for any reason, you're watching it because it's prime time Nicole Kidman. And he's a decent Batman. You know, he only did one movie and it wasn't that great of a movie, but he was decent for what it was. What now? All right, what now? What now? Okay, let's just be a panda bear. Let's look at an issue of Wolverine. Not just any issue of Wolverine, not just a random issue. Nope. This was the return of Chris Claremont to the X-Men. I don't think he wrote anything between X-Men 3 and this in 98, so that's 7 years. He was only gone for 7 years. And, you know, he comes back to this day. He did a series last year. I think he might have something already solicited again. So he never really left after he returned. But that was 7 years where he just had nothing to do with Marvel whatsoever. Behind... someone is... You know, if you just sit there and be cute, you know, I'm sure the viewing audience wouldn't mind. It's when you disrupt the proceedings. I think this has a gatefold cover. So the reason this comic is interesting is not just the Chris Claremont, although Chris Claremont and the Viper, and I love the Viper. Viper's great. This is also early work by Leniel Francis Yu, who I think he had already done some issues of Uncanny, regular Uncanny, because he did the, I think he did the, or maybe he only did Wolverine. I'm trying to remember. Maybe he hadn't done any of the regular X-Men by now. I'm not going to check. I don't think I'm going to check. So this is when they were doing the fold-outs. And I remember that this was part of a run of, this was coming at the tail end of a run of fill-ins. Yeah, actually a couple, Tom DeFalco, what are you doing? There are actually a couple Tom DeFalco issues of Wolverine. Not necessarily a character, a writer you think of with that character. But, you know, fill-ins basically just in anticipation of, you know, and it's a Wolverine book, but it's got Phoenix, Rogue, you know, Psylocke, but, you know, Yukio, Tiger, and Rogue. So it's, it's a good comic book. It's Chris Claremont writing Rogue, which doesn't cross the transom every day these days. Oh, there's a Phoenix doing something or other. I think this was coming at the tail end of when the regular books were, they spent like 5 minutes teasing, like, oh, is the Phoenix going to come back? This was during the Kelly and Casey period. No, not Kelly. Kelly and... Kelly and... I'm not remembering. I think it was Kelly and Casey on X-Men that just, didn't go anywhere. So I can't remember if this was part of that or not. But there's the Phoenix, and here's Wolverine on another, the X crucifix that he was on when he met Jubilee. Very memorably in X-Men 251. One of the first issues of X-Men I ever bought. it's quite an issue to start with. So they're in Australia. What are they in Australia for? I mean, there's the gateway on his hill. And Jean Grey, I believe, in a costume that has never been used before or since. This is a striking Twix ad. And so the whole deal with this was he comes back married to the Viper. Yeah, that's the hook of the story. Somehow or other, he becomes married to the Viper. So it just, what was I just saying in the last video about Asian martial arts, organized crime stuff, sort of, being bolted on to the X-Men mythos. Never really central, but, once in a while, and Psylocke's involved, and certainly she was still in her Quanon form at that point. So, it's a milieu that she's familiar with. But you see, it's a nice looking comic book. He outgrew the habit of drawing backgrounds. That's rude of me. That's a nice looking Rogue. Again, not a costume that I've ever seen her in anywhere else. She's not usually one for the cleavage. I guess she was feeling herself. So it's just old home week with Yukio, and someone's falling through a wall, so that means this person. I know that I would lose all my subscribers if I went on a rant about disliking Kitty Pryde, but she's not my favorite character. And I've read many, many comics in which she features prominently, including, I think, everything that Chris Claremont wrote with her, and I do not like her. She'd be like the worst person to work at an office job with. If she was in the cubicle opposite yours, you would hate coming to work. You would. And again, not a costume that she ever wore again. She's not one for the hot pants. Never was. So, yeah, kind of interesting, costume variants. You can tell Claremont's back in town. And, there are worse things to find in an X-Men comic book than lots of pictures of pretty girls, If that has always been an element of the X-Men success, at least since the very beginning. Oh, there's Jubilee. Your plasmoids ain't going to do much against the exploding house. You need Kenshiro for that. So, they're chasing after something, or they're chasing after the Viper, okay. So you got all of the women who are closest to Wolverine coming together against, or is that, no, that's not the Viper. Oh, there we go. And suddenly he's doing his, all up in his Asian ninja best. He's using a weapon. That's the only time he ever uses a weapon. It's a nice looking book, though. You have to, wait a minute, is that? That suddenly looks like, must have changed inkers because it suddenly looks completely different. Very dynamic. That's a nice, striking image. Oh, suddenly it looks completely different, but not bad. Wow. Wow, look at that. This is a nice looking comic book. I'm not reading, I'm not paying any attention to what's actually happening in the comic book. But look at this, it's nice, it looks nice. It's interesting. Nice coloring even, that wasn't a given in this period. Who's doing it? Jason Wright. Oh, wait, are we? And there's Viper. there she is. You know what makes me so angry in Snap? Her cards have black hair. The Viper has green hair. That's her thing. That's like her, raison d'etre. And if any of you know any of the developers for Snap, you need to tell them that. It's important. Oh, Black Widow. Well, she has a sort of a tertiary relationship with Wolverine. Nowhere near as much as Captain America or certainly Daredevil. Oh, and there we go. And Rogue decides it's time to kiss him. So, maybe is she doing that to knock him out? Maybe she's doing that to get up to speed with what's going on. Oh, wow, that's nice. That's nice. Gotta admit, that's pretty nice looking. He's still got the bone claws. They've never brought back the bone claws. Krakoa gave them a great opportunity to, bring back the bone claws for some reason or another, and they never did. And, it was an interesting look. They didn't play fair with it. After a while, they just started treating the bone claws like they could cut through anything. And it's like they would not be able to cut through anything. They would basically be, able to cut through anything a bear claw could cut through, which is a lot. But they had it just like cutting like straight metal poles, And, there should be some limitations, and people just got sick of writing around those limitations. And it took them too long to bring the adamantium back. Why'd she come after you so hot and heavy? The oldest reason there is, Jubilee. Viper is my wife. Oh, and they're even embracing. So you have to admit, Chris Claremont certainly came back with a bang there. Wow, here's something I don't remember at all. And because of this dark lettering on a black background, I can't make out their hair, so, I'll never learn about that movie. I don't recognize any of these names. Married Life takes a turn for the worse as Sabretooth guest stars. Yeah, I don't want him on my honeymoon. Okay, here's a fun one. Gen13, but not from early in the run, from later in the run, after the original, I believe, all the original creators have left, and they've left these characters in the able hands of Gary Frank and Cam Smith, who had a pretty significant run on Gen13 that you never hear anyone talk about, because Gen13 is kind of an underread book, and that's not necessarily fair, because it was a fun book. It was a very nice-looking book, and it was an important book. So, it should probably have endured a little bit better than it did. Maybe these characters were tied to they were tied very closely to a time and a place. But, lots of characters are, and then they just get another interpretation. And it never seemed to stick with these guys. Although I like them. I've always liked Gen13. I didn't always buy them consistently, but it wasn't always available on the newsstand, or if I wasn't going to the comic book store regularly. But in hindsight, I wish that I had gotten back into buying it regularly when Frank and Smith took over, because I loved Gary Frank. I bought just about everything Gary Frank did, but I think this run came out when, my access to comic books that weren't on the newsstand was kind of catch as catch can. I got a little, I think it was just a period where we weren't traveling a lot. So it was like, what was in front of me. Because we just weren't going to the comic book store very often, and this wasn't on the newsstand where I was. I remember buying this one at the gas station sometimes. So, if this is Gary Frank at the height of his powers, if you hear a chirping in the back, he found the mouse. I don't want to dissuade him from playing with the mouse. This is, Gary Frank at his absolute best when he was inked by Cam Smith. And if you've watched this show, you've heard me gush about the Gary Frank Cam Smith team. One of my favorite penciler inker teams. They looked so good. And Gary Frank just doesn't draw like this anymore. He just doesn't. He uses a lot more not this smooth, very, very Alan Davis in a lot of ways, which, you can definitely say, he grew out of when he got different finishes. But man, this is just such a gorgeous looking comic book. His Tangent Flash is one of my very favorite comic books. Such a beautiful comic book. But this looks nice too. I don't really know what's going on. It's who else drew some Gen 13? Steve Dillon. So interesting artistic lineage there. And Adam Warren. Those issues are hard to find because no one was buying the book at that point. And here's some monsters. These look like the kind of monsters you fight in a Wildstorm comic book. And there's a dude with long... Oh, wait, is that Warblade? Oh my god, that looks like Warblade. Oh, so the Wildcats are having something to do with this. Is that Grifter? Oh, that might be Grifter. Grifter alert. So, Wildcats just wandered into a Gen 13 story. And Gen 13 are doing what they do best, which is just sit around, being gripey at each other. I mean, I don't want to pass it too quickly. This is nice work. Look at that. For two people sitting at a dining room table talking, my God, that looks good. Looks like somebody woke up on the wrong side of the coffin. Early PlayStation ads. It's an aesthetic. I never had a PlayStation. I recognize the aesthetic. So they're sitting around the house and people are... Is that Fairchild's dad? Mr. F? Red hair? I don't remember what was going on. I was buying this book intermittently. I couldn't find it all the time. I just explained. So Roxy wants to know what's happening. She wants to have some explanation. But these ninja guys are about to break in. That's a nice panel. Directing your eye right where you need to go there. Man, that's just... He knows how to draw a comic book page. Oh, DV8 was already up to 23. That was on Al Rio by then, who worked at both Top Cow and Wildstorm in the period. They're doing something or other. I don't know. And Crimson's up to 6. We looked at an issue of Crimson at some point here. Maybe I'll pull out another at some point. An interesting, kind of prophetic book in terms of, subject matter. Teen vampire stuff was just sort of coming into its own there in the late 90s. So it was right at the beginning of that wave. And he never went back to it. After they had the whole teen vampire craze, you'd think it would have been the perfect time for it. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. And he's one of the most prolific Spider-Man artists of all time. Crimson should be in print. Well, hello. I don't remember her name, but I remember her. She's the type of character who makes an impression on the audience. And, that's... Oh, goodness, what's going on? Art Adams, there's an Art Adams backup. Wow, I don't remember that at all. He did a fair amount of work. He did a Gen 13 Generation X crossover, which I'm going to have on the TikTok channel one of these days. Hasn't quite made it into the pile yet. Well, hello, am I on your way? Ooh, Wildstorm news. Is that there? That's their bullpen bulletin. Looks kind of like a Star Trek credits. September releases. So that cliffhanger was going. I don't know if Danger Girl released issue 5 on time. Darkchild was at Wildstorm for a while. Resident Evil, there's that first generation PlayStation. Divine Right, I don't know how long that lasted. No one remembers that. No one remembers that. DV8, C20, Jim Lee's C23, I don't remember that. Gathering of Eagles, don't. The only thing sticking around for Homage Comics is the Astro City. And they're doing some trading cards. But there's Art Adams drawing Fairchild at a carnival. Oh my God, Fairchild juggling barnyard animals. This is fantastic. Art Adams drawing Fairchild from Gen13 juggling barnyard animals. My God, this is a comic book. Do you see this, Roger? Does this distract you from your constant, lust for mayhem? There are giants in our midst, boy. He was already taking the turn towards the cartoony that would really come into its own for his material later in the 2000s. It doesn't pencil anywhere near as much as he used to. And here's early Adam Warren, what are you doing? Early Adam Warren work with Gen13. He did a fair amount of Gen13. He was pretty good with the characters. Pretty much everything he does, even the comic books he just writes. Every now and again he'll show up just writing something, and it's excellent without fail. His writing is good. His drawing is good. Basically, he's an extraordinarily talented man. And Astro City. So it was already fair into its run, collecting, from the first year of the run. Volume 2. So it had a fair amount of story under its belt by then. All right, what do we got? How about something that isn't from the 90s? I plucked a random issue of The Incredible Hulk that is notable for being, I want to say, the last or one of the last issues written by Bill Mantlo, and possibly the last issue written by Bill Mantlo, and the last issue drawn by Mike Mignola. That's a dynamite creative team. But they're gone, and John Byrne takes over. And these guys, Englehart and Mignola, they go over and do some Alpha Flight. Mike Mignola drew a fair amount of Alpha Flight. I love early Mike Mignola. It's my favorite Mignola. And I know, I'm a broken record. What's my favorite Miller? Early Miller. What's my favorite Mignola? Early Mignola. But what can I say? I'm nothing if not consistent. So I love the work Mignola does at this time. He's using a lot more lines. He's drawing more. That is one thing about, from the mid-90s on, he just draws less. And that becomes part of his style. The absolute definition of minimalism. And, to a degree, that's why I find his later work kind of cold. His early work has a real vibrancy, life. Look at that. That's just, you can feel how strong the Hulk is. And how these dudes are like messing with some like pink rope on his back. Because this is coming at the end of the year that he had been marooned in interdimensional space because he had lost his mind. Up to issue 300 of the Hulk, he had lost his mind and been exiled to the Crossroad of Worlds by Doctor Strange. So he spent a year basically just sort of wandering around in different, fantasy worlds. And it was kind of an interesting period. Maybe, a year was about as much as they could get out of it because they gave him a whole new direction when he came back. They gave him a whole new creative team. And the John Byrne on Hulk is actually kind of underrated. It's a very forward-thinking run on his part, and it's interrupted. So it's kind of ironic. Like, it's kind of a interesting, stylistically forward-thinking run, and it doesn't last very long. That's the way the world works, baby. Oh, so they had lots of these young astronaut ads at the time. Space camp. I know a guy who went to space camp. It was a real thing. And if you don't know what space camp is, Google it. Or Google doesn't work anymore. Wikipedia. God, it sucks. Google used to work. Google used to do things. It was an amazing feat of human engineering. And now it is nothing. And they will work mightily to get back to a fraction of what they once were. So, you know, this is Mike Mignola being inked by Gary Talayak, Bob Sharon on colors. So, you know, this isn't even him inking himself, and yet you can already see he's making a lot of use of spotted blacks, but he's not afraid to also do some, you know, drawing, some illustration. So look at this. This is just nice looking comic book. And suddenly he's just, so he decides to throw, oh wow, this is intense. Because he gets sick of running around this place, just having weird, like, flashbacks to when he was a kid. Because this was the period when we learned all about his, we just learned about all about his child abuse in the issue before this. So that was like Bill Mantlo's last big, you know, stinger on the character. So he's in a really bad place. So he just decides he's going to leap. So he jumps off the crossroads of reality, and he falls into a vast vortex. Man, I'm cursed. I'm doomed. I can't ever be free. I can't even kill myself. I can't even die. Wow. This, you know, the Bill Mantlo run on the Hulk is really good. Is it the best thing Bill Mantlo ever wrote? It is excellent. It laid the groundwork for everything. It laid the groundwork for Peter David. It laid the groundwork for Immortal Hulk. It laid the groundwork for Planet Hulk. Basically, every good Hulk story has its origins in something that happens in the Bill Mantlo run. Oh, and there's your guy. There's your guy. That's a nice looking Hulk, you have to admit. Mike Mignola drew a very nice Hulk. And so Hulk is, he was angry. Like, he was angry for a while, and he sort of mellows out over the course of his period in the reality. But, you know, Bruce Banner, he's trapped again. He has to become the Hulk. He becomes the Hulk on purpose because, you know, the Hulk is just, it's either that or they're going to die, and the Hulk's not going to let him die. So he's just trapped at the base of reality here. A change has come over the Hulk. No longer is he the screaming, mindless monster whom Doctor Strange banished to the crossroads. No, with the rebirth of Bruce Banner, the status quo, that nightmare disrupted when he freed the Hulk's savagery from Banner's irrational restraints, has been partially reestablished. Partially. When he picks up on the Byrne run, he's actually pretty savage again. So that was kind of an unnecessary development. So, you know, Bill Mantlo, he does the old school thing. He puts the character more or less back where he started. You know, he's been changed significantly, but, you know, the status quo is back to normal. John Byrne upsets the status quo, and it takes a while. Al Milgrom has a little mini run. The book is kind of aimless, and even in the first part of the Peter David run, Peter David did not know he was writing that book regularly until well into his run on it. So his first run isn't that great. The first part of his run isn't that great. It takes him a while for him to warm up to it because the Hulk wasn't a book anyone was paying attention to or anyone was having long runs on after Bill Mantlo. So he's stuck by this hook. He's got this hook in his back. And he can't get it off because it's right in like the small of his back. Not even the Hulk can get at the small of his back. The Immortal Hulk would probably just like bend his arm backwards to rip it off. But that's not in this Hulk's toolkit. So he's just bouncing around trying to get it off him. And he ends up, this is kind of cool. He just ends up jumping through all these worlds, this robot world where he's just this strange organic interloper, and it's a world of these weird blue creatures and strange like space jellyfish. This is just this looks fantastic. You have to admit, like this is a nice looking comic book. Some weird medieval realm with like elf people. Hulk cannot get free of the line. Man, when you see who's drawn him, you're gonna be surprised. I bet you're not gonna guess who it is. If you've read it before, you know. But if you don't know, you're probably not gonna guess who is on the other end of this line. Oh, and he's fighting tentacles. He's with dinosaurs. Just weird fantasy stuff. Destroying a temple. This giant demon dude is actually trying to help him, but that doesn't seem to do anything. There's a robot war. Hulk wants to know who's doing this. Ooh. And there's some sort of ethereal creature of light who appears to him. And it's Dr. Walter Lankowski. Oh, it's Sasquatch. So maybe you have a better idea who's on the other end of the line. So, he's not someone who was that often in the Hulk, but every now and again, they did a story about the fact that Lankowski was connected to the Hulk that way. So we're talking about Alpha Flight and how his spirit, I guess, is... his spirit's inhabiting the Hulk's body and talking to Bruce Banner's spirit. That's what's happening here. And he's basically giving a recap of how he died in Alpha Flight. Oh boy, fun times. And so that's what they were doing. They were trying to find another body because they didn't have a body that Walter Lankowski could put his spirit in, because he was a disembodied spirit at that point. So they just tried to fish one out of interdimensional space, which is an idea that seems very natural in the context of a Bill Mantlo comic book. It doesn't occur to them to use an LMD. Maybe they didn't have those in Canada. Oh, this is nice. The hatching. That we see the Hulk and various spirits interacting with his body. So yeah, this is definitely something that also showed up in Immortal Hulk. The Walter Lankowski jumping between bodies. Walter Lankowski, he just always takes the short end of the stick. He's just not an interesting person. So they're getting drawn back. Pulls Hulk where? Well, you probably guessed by now. It's Alpha Flight. So next issue, the story is finished in Alpha Flight 29. And basically Alpha Flight 29 is this incarnation of Alpha Flight, which is not a very powerful incarnation of Alpha Flight, basically just trying to survive, because they're the first thing the Hulk sees when they fish him out of interdimensional space, and he is not happy. Although he's back on Earth, so he's probably happy about that. And I'm sorry, Box, Aurora, Puck, they do not last long against Hulk. Although, if you want to know, there is some, Puck being, facing off against the Hulk. It wasn't the first time. If that felt out of left field for you in Immortal Hulk, he did have, this connection to the character. To be continued in Alpha Flight 29. And the thing is, the reason why this is interesting is because the books switch creative teams. John Byrne had done almost 2.5 years of Alpha Flight, and he wanted to draw the Hulk. So Bill Mantlo and Mike Mignola went and did Alpha Flight. And Bill Mantlo stayed on Alpha Flight for a lot longer than Mike Mignola, but Mike Mignola was replaced by Jim Lee, and we looked at a Jim Lee Alpha Flight, one of the last handful of videos. All right, was there bullpen bulletins back here? I know I can tell you this was the month after the Secret Wars 2 crossover, because the reason the line finds the Hulk randomly in the middle of interdimensional space is the Beyonder. Oh, it's on the back page. Is the Beyonder. He sees it fishing around, and he's like, oh, well, we'll just deal with this loose end and bring the Hulk back to Earth, because that was the kind of thing that the Beyonder got up to. Any interesting names here that I recognize? No future pros or famous letter hacks. Next issue, big changes in John Byrne. And John Byrne does do some big changes. He honestly leaves the character in a very weird situation. And they just made him gray because they were desperate for a direction. And that was actually Al Milgrom. It wasn't Peter David. It was an Al Milgrom comic where he just decided, because no one was doing anything with the Hulk, let's just turn him gray and make him nocturnal again. And that was the version of the character that Peter David inherited. And he ran with that character for a good few years. And the Hulk became really popular because people liked him being sort of a gray SOB. It was interesting. And this is, towards the very end, 1985. So we're easing into 1986. Next year is the last year of Jim Shooter at Marvel, because Tom DeFalco takes over in 1987. But this isn't a bad line of comics that Jim Shooter was fielding, even given all the talent that he alienated over the years. Epic was still publishing Dreadstar. They were doing Moonshadow. Gru the Wanderer had just started its run. Black Dragon, which is John Bolton and Chris Claremont. The One, that's excellent series, Rick Veitch. They were doing ElfQuest on newsstands. Epic Illustrated was just finishing up its run. Hey, Epic Illustrated has a Dave Sim Cerebus portfolio in it. And that was during the last Galactus story, which has never been completed. Star Comics was going gangbusters. Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham, was up to 4. Ewoks, 4. Muppet Babies, that was Marie Severin's run on Muppet Babies. Doctor Who was up to issue 14. I don't think Doctor Who lasted that long. It was publishing most of it was publishing the British book. They didn't try doing American Adventures of Doctor Who. Maybe that might have been interesting, but maybe the BBC had no interest in allowing that to happen. So we're getting to where there's a lot of crossover, a lot of turnover. A lot of titles were canceled around the time of the Second Secret Wars. New Defenders, Power Man and Iron Fist, Dazzler, all these titles, just they sort of came to an end. And part of the reason why so many books came to an end, The Thing, that's another one that ended. I'm looking here. Conan the King lasted a surprising amount of time. Lasted well into the late 80s. And I loved Conan the King. That's the book that made Mark Silvestri. Read Sonya's towards the end of its run, which is kind of funny because it doesn't last that much longer than this. But they just had the movie with Louise Simonson and Mary Wilshire. So if you see it, Mary Wilshire, you know it's good. Rom's 3 issues away from ending. They did a Solomon Kane series. Always interesting to see where Solomon Kane shows up. G.I. Joe was already on issue 41. Transformers were only on issue 10. Iron Man 200. That was the climax of a very long Iron Man story. If you ever want to read a good long Iron Man run, Denny O'Neil, I think, that's my favorite Iron Man run. And I'm not a fan of Denny O'Neil's writing otherwise. He wrote an excellent Iron Man. All right, so fun stuff. Honeycomb. Yeah, post-Honeycomb, big-time baseball. All right, so that was a fun episode. Read some interesting comic books. Some very good-looking comic books, actually. Hopefully, the algorithm likes me talking about Wolverine. I'm a complete pander bear. I have no misgivings about that whatsoever. So anyway, we had fun. Stick around. I got plenty of videos. You can put on my videos as you go to sleep. Listen to me all through the night. I got tons on here. Now, I do daily videos, daily scripted comic book reviews on TikTok and Instagram. I'm up to like 400 some, so I've been doing them for a while. And I plan to keep on doing them for at least a little while longer, until I get bored of doing it, basically. So I enjoy doing it. Right now, I'm in the middle of Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck every Friday. We're just finishing up. In fact, probably by the time you see this, we'll probably be done with the Dwayne McDuffie and Ernie Colon Damage Control, the first series, and the Eddie Campbell, Sean Phillips Hellblazer. And I'm not quite sure what comes after those. I try not to work too much ahead of time, or I'll get bored. So I got a podcast with Claire Napier. It's called Udder Madness. We talk about Top Cow Comics. That's Mark Silvestri, Michael Turner, Fathom, Cyberforce, Witchblade, The Darkness, all that good stuff. We have fun with it. I just put up a video of video annotations for our podcast on YouTube. They should be just a click away. With me just putting up really nice art from what we're talking about on the podcast. And what else? If you like this podcast, or no, if you like that podcast, you should check out the Patreon. And if you like this show, you should check out my Patreon. That's how you make your feelings known. If you want me to do more of these, if you want me to do them at a greater clip, if you want me to put advanced episodes up on the Patreon, the way you show it is you join the Patreon. You tell me what you want. Tell me what you want to cover. Pop up in the comments. Tell me what's going on. I enjoy doing these, and I'm glad you're watching them. So have a great day. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. Be kind to small children. Be kind to animals. And please have a very pleasant day.